about friendship in the Bible is that in the New Testament, God pretty much says, you should be treating everyone like they're your friend. You should be giving them the love that you would give a friend. You should be caring for them that way. You should be reaching out to them with that. When we look to examples of how the Bible talks about friendship, it's primarily found in the Old Testament, as we look at the relationships between people and the way that they get to know one another. Now, when I was thinking about what we're doing this week, I thought about an experience I had about 8 months ago. I was having kind of a rough time, was down about a few things, and was pretty upset, and I went and I had lunch with a friend of mine. Now, I knew he'd been going through some stuff as well, but as I came to him and we talked, and I kind of poured out my heart, you ever been in that situation where somebody looks at you and sort of gives you a vote of no confidence? That they tell you, well, yeah, that is a problem, and here are your other 4 problems too, and yeah, you know, it probably never will get any better, and things are just going to get worse. That was pretty much my experience with him. Not going to name names. He's a fellow pastor friend of mine, and we sat and we talked, and you know, as Laura would tell you, it was not a good experience. I came home in a much worse frame of mind than I left. And then about 2 weeks later, I went and I had lunch with another pastor friend of mine. Now, it could be because it was Chinese food, so it was better. I don't know. I was over at Warriors Grill. It was Mongolian barbecue. It's good stuff, always. But anyway, you know, maybe it was the not as many carbs eating there. I don't know. But anyway, in that conversation, as I shared almost the exact same problems, the exact same feelings, this individual really did these 2 things. On the one hand, he lifted me up and encouraged me that maybe things were not quite as bleak as they seemed at exactly that moment. And he was right. Talked and built me up in terms of my own abilities and so on, because when you get down like that, you doubt yourself and that you're ever going to do anything meaningful. And most importantly, directed me back to God. Reminded me that a lot of the things I was upset about were really God's business, not my business. Were really what He was in control of, not what I could do anything about. And I left that time of sitting there, bringing the same burden when I came, walking away, feeling it lifted, feeling that this person had confidence in me and saw something more within me and reminded me that the ultimate arbiter of who I am is God's opinion of me, is Christ's opinion of me, not all of these other things I was upset about. I think we've all experienced this in our lives, in our friendships. That sometimes we go to someone expecting something to lift us up, and instead it pulls us back down. That we go to a friend expecting to feel better, and it makes us feel worse. And then other times with a different friend, or maybe even with the same friend at a different situation or circumstance, we get into that same conversation, and they lift us up and help us to draw closer to God. We all want friendships like that. We all want friends that we can trust, who will be there with us and help carry us through the toughest part of our lives. As we look at the scripture, I was really struck by David and the way in which some of his friends came through in probably the toughest part of David's life. Now, to set the story for you a little bit, what's going on here is that David is getting a little bit older, and his sons are grown. And the great news is that David's sons are capable administrators. That he knows that there's going to be a group of people to follow him in running the nation of Israel that can get the job done. They know what they're doing. They're proven leaders. Now the problem is when you've got a king and you've got princes, and the princes are ready and able to rule, sometimes they get a little bit impatient about when they get to be king. And his oldest son at that point, Absalom, decided that, you know what, it looks like Dad might be going to pick Solomon instead of me. And I'm already in my 40s, I ought to be king by now, maybe it's time. And so he put together an entire scheme where he got himself crowned king, and it looked like the whole nation was behind him. He's down there in a place called Hebron. He has a big ceremony that he invites everyone to, and at the end of it, his key people that he had throughout the crowd stand up and proclaim him king, and everybody's going, Absalom's king, yay! David has a little bit different take on it, and in chapter 15, of the book of 2 Samuel, this is what we see. It says, "Then the king's servants said to the king, 'Behold, your servants are ready to do whatever the Lord your king chooses.'" See, they'd already come up to him and gone, "King, Absalom's been declared king. David, what are we going to do? What are we going to do?" And David, realizing that Absalom has all the people with him, and they're marching up to Jerusalem, and Jerusalem is basically a city on top of a hill in the middle of a plain with a wall around it. He's like, if I stay here, I'm going to be like the mouse in the cage. I'm never getting out. So he decides it's time to go walkabout. It's time to go run away. That he can't oppose Absalom from inside the city, and so he takes off. And what we find here is really the narration of what happens when King David abandons Jerusalem and runs away from his son who has been declared king, from his son who it looks like is going to take over the nation, and everybody's behind him and everybody's with him. As David makes this decision to run away, this is what he says. He says, "So the king went out with all his household and with him, but the king left 10 concubines to keep the house. The king went out and all the people with him, and they stopped at the last house. Now all the servants passed on beside him, all the Cherethites, the Pelethites, and the Gittites, there will not be a test. 600 men who had come with him from Gath passed on before the king. Then the king said to Ittai the Gittite, 'Why will you go also with us? Return, remain with the king, for you are a foreigner and an exile. Return to your own place. You came only yesterday. And shall I today make you wander with us while I go where I will? Return, take back your brothers. Mercy and truth be with you.' But Ittai answered the king and said, As the Lord lives, and as the Lord my king lives, surely wherever the Lord my king may be, whether for death or for life, there also your servant will be." Now, I'm not going to say is Ittai the Gittite 12 times fast, so we're just going to call him Izzy. So Izzy, and yes, anyway, we're good with that. All right, so Izzy here, David comes up, David's leaving, and he leaves with him. He's got 600 trained fighting men with him, and they're going to follow him out. And the first thing David does is David lets him off the hook. He says, "Look, you just got here. The other guy, you shouldn't have to go wander in the desert with me." And in fact, the funny thing is when you look back to the Hebrew, he talks about wandering around the desert. It actually says, you shouldn't have to go with me and walk around. He has no idea where he's going. He has no idea how far he's going to get. He has no idea whether he's going to get 1 mile outside of Jerusalem and be ambushed by Absalom and his men, or whether he's going to be able to find some place to hold up for the night, and what the end's going to be. He has no idea. And here this individual who's recently arrived at court and has attached himself to him says, "No, I'll follow you in." When we look at that, isn't that the type of friendship we want? Don't we want a friend like Izzy who says, "You've got to go make a trek out of the wilderness, pursued by the bad guys who want to take your head. I'll come with you and help you out"? That's the person we want backing us up. That's the person we want standing there with us. Now, interestingly enough, we read into this and we find out, why is Izzy like that? Well, he's like that because David took him in. We notice from the scripture that it says he was a refugee. That he came from the town of Gath, which is the town of the Philistines, who are the enemies of Israel. That he had been somebody who was kind of high and mighty there, and he got out of favor with the king, and he went to David for sanctuary, where he could be safe. That David and his kingdom protected Izzy from those who wanted to kill him back home. And David didn't just accept them as refugees. He brought him in and made him part of the army. He brought him in and made him part of his palace guard. He elevated his friend and his friend's men up to a level where they couldn't be rejected or set aside or marginalized in the midst of the society of Israel. And in response to David standing by him so firmly and so strongly, Izzy is intensely loyal to him. We see that loyalty even further in the way that David reacts. That when David tells him, "Go home. Go back home. You can stay here in Jerusalem. The new king, my son, will take you on as being a part of his palace guard. You guys are too valuable for him not to do that. I know you'll be fine." And yet Izzy demands, "No, I'm going with you. I'm walking around in the wilderness with you, with no idea where we're going to end up." We see this not only in him, but in the next few passages, we see this idea repeated. The next group that show up to him are people called Abiathar and Zadok. We'll call them Abby and Z. Abby and Z show up, and they brought the Ark of the Covenant from the tabernacle. Now, I don't know whether they're thinking they're going to go all Indiana Jones on Absalom's army or what, I don't know. But they brought the Ark of the Covenant, and they come marching out. They're like, we don't want Absalom to get the Ark. We'll go out into the desert with it. And David's response is, okay, first of all, boys, put the Ark back. Put it back where you found it. You can't keep it. We're not taking it out. If God sees fit to bring me back to the city, fine. If he doesn't, that's his judgment on me, and hey, I deserve it. I'm going to submit to whatever God wants, but let's not go disturbing God's ark, taking out of where God said it should be, where the tabernacle is supposed to be. So first he does that, sets them back. Now why are Abby and Zeke so attached to him? Because they're the ones that were wandering with him in the desert for all those years while Saul was chasing him. That when Saul came in and slaughtered Abby's father and the rest of the priests, David took him in to protected him through all that time they were wandering in the wilderness, and then made him the high priest of the temple. David stood by his friend when it put him in even more danger from Saul. And then when that danger was over and he was king, he did not forget his friend, but kept there with him and lifted him up. These men were faithful to David because David was faithful to them. These men were loving towards David and were willing to follow him into the wilderness because he was faithful to them. In an additional note, David not only shows the fact that he loves God and he respects God and he trusts God enough to send the ark back, but he also shows us that he's not, that he is kind of the sharpest tool in the shed. Because then he says, by the way, guys, in case you hadn't been thinking, you do have sons, right? Well, yeah. And you could give these sons messages and they could come from Jerusalem and find me in the wilderness and tell me what's going on. Right? And they're like, oh, yeah, okay, all right, got it. And they go back with their sons. A little bit further on down the road, David is going, and a guy named Hushai shows up. We're going to call him Hush Up because David wanted him to hush somebody else up. One of the wisest men in the area is Ahithophel. You won't need to know his name because he doesn't survive the story. But Ahithophel throws in with Absalom. And he's known as being one of the smartest men in the land. One of the wisest guys out there. And when Hushai shows up next to David, David goes, look, you're 80. I'm 70. We don't need another old man on this expedition. You'll just slow us down. You stay here and you frustrate the advice of Ahithophel. You stay here and you show up in Absalom's court and you try to keep his good advice from leading Absalom down the path of wisdom and keep him from causing problems. So that's what Hushai does. He stays, and when Ahithophel gives the great advice that would have gotten David killed that evening, he's able to hush that advice up and lead Absalom down a path that appeals to his vanity, but is a bad idea. And the only clue that we have about why David's relationship with this man was such that he would stand by him is that every time he's referred to in this passage or around it, he's referred to as the king's friend. That here's an individual whose advice David sought, and he lifted him up and said, this guy's my friend. He's not my court minister, he's not this position or that position, he's not related to me, but he's my friend. And he's somebody I listen to. Sometimes one of the hardest things to do is to own someone as a friend when you're around other people who don't like them. When you're around other people who would rather disregard them or talk them down, sometimes the hardest thing we can do is actually own that person as a friend and say, they're my friend. I believe in them. They care about me. I care about them. They're worth my friendship. David does that, and as he is faithful to Hushai, Hushai is faithful to him. We finally see David leave and wander out into the wilderness, and he heads out, he travels around, he gets some really annoying stuff happening by one of the descendants of Saul. And as it goes forward, in chapter 17, towards the end, David finally comes to rest. He comes to a place called Mahanaim. And while he goes to this place called Mahanaim, Absalom and his forces cross the Jordan. Now, the place David has talked about being is a city on a river a little bit away from where Absalom and his people are. Now, where Absalom and his people camp, they don't just camp in one city. They camp in a whole region. There's so many of them that they cover this side of the Jordan River over a major area. And while this is happening, in the midst of that kind of threat, what we see that we see that Israel and Absalom camp in the land of Gilead. Now when David had come to Mahanaim, Shobi, the son of Nashan, from Rabbah, the sons of Ammon, please don't go to sleep, Malchir, the son of Amiel, from Lo-Debar, and Barzillai, the son of Gilead, from Rogelim, they brought beds, basins, pottery, wheat, barley, flour, parched grain, beans, lentils, parched seeds, honey, curds, sheep, cheese of the herd, for David and the people who are with him. This would be the first recorded potluck. To eat, for he said, the people are hungry and weary and thirsty in the wilderness. Now, so these men, they are residents of the area where David has gone and hidden with his group of people to escape Absalom. Absalom has marched in with his huge army. That when it's referred to, it's that they're like the sand on the grains of the seashore. That they would come over and they would overwhelm any opposition David might raise. And in the midst of these overwhelming odds, we see these three men come out and decide that they are going to help David with all the things that his group of people needs. That they're going to bring all that they have to him so that they can survive in the wilderness, so that they can have what they need, so they can eat and be made strong. But once again, as we begin to dig into this, we find that these three men, they didn't just wander in off the street. They didn't just show up. One, Malchir, we call him Mikey. Mikey has had previous contact with David. You see, David, when he became king, one of the first things you do when you become king in this sort of a situation is you find everybody who might possibly be related to the old king. And what do you do to everybody that might possibly be related to the old king? You kill them. So David goes searching for the descendants of Saul, and he finds a guy by the name of Mephibosheth. You don't have to say that. Mephibosheth is staying with Mikey. He's a grandson of Saul. He's a son of Jonathan. And when David shows up at the door, he's sure he's come for this guy's head. He's come, I promised his dad I'd look after him, and this is not going to work out, and he's going to not just kill him, but my whole household for sheltering him. But then what turns out is that what David was actually doing is finding a son of Jonathan. And he says, you've been here in hiding, come out of hiding, you're coming to my court. You've been counted as a nobody on the outside. Now I'm going to treat you like one of my sons. You're going to eat at the royal table every day. You know, all the lands that your grandfather had, they're yours now. And the person who's been working it, he's going to be your servant, and he's going to work those lands for you. Mephibosheth was lame in both feet. That's one of the things that made him not a contender to take up the crown and be king. And he says, from this point on, you're going to live with me, and you're going to have the same honor as any one of my sons, as any one of my lords, as any one of my nobles. Now, don't you think after Mikey saw David do that, he was ready to do anything for him? Because he knew what kind of a man David was. That he was the kind of a man that instead of killing someone who could be opposed to him, raised him up and brought him closer than a brother into his own family, into his own heart. Another one of the individuals there that we call Shobi, what Shobi did is that he was a relative of a king who ticked David off. That his relative, basically, David sent some messengers to go say, oh, I'm so sorry your dad passed away. He and I were good friends. We can be good friends too. I want to continue the alliance. Well, that particular king decided that David had ulterior motives. And these guys were there to come and to check out and spy out the place so that David could attack. And so he shaved off half their beards, which is really embarrassing. And I'll tell you right now, it looks kind of funny when you do that. Shaved off half their beards. And then, basically, he made them run away in miniskirts. He cut off their robes in such a way that they were exposed, to say the least, and made them run about 5 miles to Jericho to get away. David's response was kind of predictable. He got the army together and beat the living tar out of that kingdom. What's interesting here is that despite the fact that David had been an enemy of Shobi years before, that now the relationship is close enough that he has made not only peace, but become friends. In many ways, that's part of the story of David, that he had better friends than he did sons. And he did this by standing by them, by being an upright kind of a guy, by going to those who were weak and had no power and raising them up, by treating people fairly even when he was being treated unfairly. And time and again, as we see here, by standing by and acknowledging those who were his friends, he saw them return that loyalty to him in friendship as well. When we think about friends that we can trust, we want people to be there for us. We want somebody we can call at midnight and say, can you come watch the kids? I got to take somebody to the hospital. We want somebody that we can call at 2 in the morning and say, come get me up. I don't think I can drive, for whatever the reason might be. We want somebody who we know will be there. And the problem is that it's hard to find that. Because as human beings, what we want is we want someone to be a friend like that to us first. And then we'll know that we can trust them enough to be that kind of a friend to them. What we see in the Scriptures, it works the opposite way. That first we are the trustworthy one. First we are the one that gets up and puts on our sweatpants at midnight and goes to help them out. First we are the one who stands by them. And that would be great. And if I stopped right here, it would be, we could all go out and we should be better friends, and I should work harder to be a friend to the people around me, and I should make sure that I'm there for them. But let's be honest here. We've all been in that situation and failed the test. We've been in that group of people and our friend shows up and we haven't acknowledged them because we didn't want to look bad in front of the people we were talking to. That we have received that call at midnight or at 2 in the morning and we've pressed the button on our phone that makes it go away. That we've been in a situation where we knew we were supposed to step up and we didn't. You know why I know that? Because you're human, like me. Because you're broken. Because all of us, no matter how we try, we never get it right every time. There's only one friend who's never going to let you know. There's only one friend who's always going to be there in the watches of the night. There's only one friend who is always going to be there for you, and that one friend is Jesus. That He is the one who will perfectly stand behind you. He is the one who will perfectly lift you up. He is the one who watches over you, has the power to affect the universe and to change things. He is the one who forgives you of your sins when you turn to Him and ask Him to do so. He is the one who stands by you when nobody else has the courage or the strength or the wisdom to do so. And He is the one that is there even when nobody else can be there physically to be with you. Jesus is pledged to be our friend. He is our friend in that He never abandons us. He never says, I've had enough. He never says, too much drama, I'm out. He listens, and He works and He heals. My encouragement to you this morning is if you have never asked Christ to pay for what you've done wrong and accepted that forgiveness, that this morning you would put your faith in the fact that He did die on the cross and rise from the dead. That He is the one who will forgive you, and ask Him to do so. And trust Him. Know that He takes care of all of it. That if you've already made that decision to tie your standing by someone else, not to your own power, but to His. Not to your own wisdom, but to His. Not to your own abilities, but to His. We are best when God works through us. When we don't know what to say to our friend, He's the one that gives us the words. And sometimes, like I experienced this weekend, the words are, shut up and don't say anything. And so I would urge you, and as you find yourselves in the situation to be a faithful friend, to rely on God for the wisdom of what to do. We've all worried about that line between enabling and helping. We've all worried about that situation of, is this too much on my family to be there for them? To let God be the one who speaks to your heart about where that line is and what you need to do. And then to rely on Him for the power to do that. To rely on Him for the strength to carry it through. Because it's only His work through us that allows us to be those faithful friends in the midst of sorrow. At this point, what we're going to do is we're going to receive our offering.